We're going to go through, as the chief said, a lot of information. So we're going to start off with the application process and qualifications. A lot of this information you probably already know by submitting your application if you've done so already. But we'll kind of go over some of that information. We'll give a brief overview, broad overview for the whole police department, some employment benefits, and then afterwards, as Tyler Hall mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the entire presentation, feel free to type them into the comment section at the bottom, and we'll get to them at the end. So we'll move on and discuss the application process and qualifications. So the minimum job qualifications, you have to be a minimum of 21 years old and not more than 35 years old by the time you're being placed on the eligibility list. You have to be a U.S. citizen. As a police officer, you're going to be driving around a squad car and enforcing traffic laws. So by that, you're going to have a valid Illinois driver's license. Also, you have to have an associate's degree or 60 hours of college credit from a accredited college, university, or higher learning institution. Conversely, you could also have 24 months of honorable military service or 180 days of military combat duty in lieu of those college credit hours. You have to have a vision correctable to 20/20 in both eyes. And you have to pass a series of examinations, including the written test, which I hope everybody's preparing for. And following that, as long as you pass the written test, there's an oral interview, background investigation, polygraph, psychological, and a physical with a drug screening. And we'll talk a little bit more about each one of those steps in greater detail later on. So the application is, we contract with IO Solutions as our testing agency for the written exam. So the website has a written application. You could download the website there and submit all the information to IO Solutions. The application deadline, and this is important, is this coming Friday, October 15th at 2 p.m. You have to have your application submitted by that time, as well as any supporting documents. If you haven't done so already, if you're still waiting on a couple of documents, whether it's your college transcript, copies of your birth certificate, whatever it might be, you could still drop that off. The address is listed here at the bottom. You could stop by their headquarters, drop off all that information, but that has to be submitted by October 15th at 2 p.m. There's a couple other documents that you're going to have to submit as part of the application process. And this is all information we're going to need for not only the test, to take the test, but also for the subsequent phases, your background investigation. So you have to release your medical records. That includes any alcohol, drug, or substance abuse screening. Criminal history information. After the written exam and oral interviews, when the background process starts, you're going to be fingerprinted. And the purpose of that is basically to check your criminal history to make sure you don't have anything on your record that would be contrary to what our standards are here in the Arlington Heights Police Department. Your driving record as well, so any speeding citations, traffic accidents, that's all going to be part of the application. And it's a question that we ask to see what your driving history is like. Employment, previous jobs, just like any other application you have, where have you worked, dates of employment, your high school, college, university diploma, personal information, your address where you live, driver's license number, that type of information for employment purposes. Your written examination, any drug, narcotic use. So in your application, you have to disclose, whether you've, had any drug or narcotic use in the past. Tattoos, body art. We also ask that question because we do have a policy here in Arlington Heights regarding tattoos. You can't have any visible tattoos in uniform. So if you're a uniformed officer on the street, no visible tattoos. Now that doesn't mean that you're disqualified because you have tattoos. They just have to be covered up. So if you have any tattoos on your arms, you'd have to wear long sleeve shirts, okay? So that's our policy right now. Any body art, so that's talking about piercings, anything like that. Motor vehicle operations, so that's your driving record. Military service questionnaire, that's for anybody that's had military service in their lives. eligibility for employment, authorization for a credit report, for a credit check, candidate interest questionnaire, and background authorization. Again, criminal history, residence, coworker references. During the background process, we will be checking any references that you provide to us, as well as any other references that might come up during the background investigation. Unsalaried experience, volunteer, if you've ever volunteered for another organization, you had an internship, if you're a intern at a police department or anywhere else, that also is part of the application. Final voluntary part is equal opportunity voluntary information. That's kind of more demographical information. Where'd you hear about us? And that assists us with our recruitment efforts. So how did you hear about us? Was it a posting online? Did you hear about it from a friend, a coworker, maybe a police officer here in Arlington Heights? Other required documents as part of the application: copy of your valid driver's license, so the front and back, a copy of a birth certificate, proof of citizenship, and then if you have any military discharge certificates or the DD-214 form, if applicable. Official college transcripts, they have to be original and sealed envelope, and the 60-hour minimum has to be attained by the application deadline of October 15th. A copy of a valid power test card, so that's the physical fitness exam, your 1.5 mile run, your sit-ups, your bench press. That has to be within the past year from the date of the application closing. So anywhere between October 15th of last year to October 15th of this year, you have to have that valid power test card and a copy of your high school diploma. The written exam is a little bit different than what we've done previous years. In previous years, we've actually had it in person, where the written exam, you'd come to a location here in Arlington Heights. IO Solutions would administer the exam in a big setting, whether it was at a high school, and we'd set up tables in the gym, everybody would come in and take the written exam in person. This year's a little different in planning. Again, with the pandemic and COVID, we really didn't know what was going to happen. So this year it's a virtual exam, and it's going to be held the week of November 29th. The entire week, IO Solutions will schedule out your date and time for your exam, and it'll be held virtually. And they'll provide you with instructions regarding how that's going to work, what kind of time you're looking at, and any requirements you might have for a computer or anything like that. What you want to do, if you have any specific questions regarding how the virtual exam is going to be held or when your testing is, please contact IO Solutions directly. Okay, I listed their telephone number and email on the screen, so if you want to take a second to jot that information down, that would be helpful. So if any questions come up during this process and after the application period closes, and IO Solutions does provide you with more information about when your test is going to take place, and you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to them. They're very helpful, and they'll assist you in getting you the answer you might need. Oral interviews happen after the written test. So if you pass the written exam, we'll schedule you for oral interviews, and that's tentatively in January. So as long as you pass the test, we'll, based on your position on the test, how you scored on the test, we'll start scheduling interviews at that point. But the first round of interviews will occur hopefully in January. And the eligibility list is finalized after the oral interviews. So if you had an interview, you will be placed on an eligibility list based on your score at that time. So I'll hand it off to Detective Murphy. He'll talk a little bit more about the background process.
Thank you, sir. I'm here just to kind of address some of the aspects of the background investigation. So as Deputy Chief explained, once you're placed on the eligibility list, as openings happen, I'll be directed to start a background investigation on the next candidate. There seems to be a little bit of mystery surrounding the process and builds up some anxiety for the applicants, and that's not something that we want you to go through. It's a fairly straightforward process. I'll give you a phone call and ask you to come in, and we'll sit down for an interview. One of the things that I'm going to suggest when you get that phone call for your first interview, Start looking over your application. If you saved a copy, look at your references, maybe give them a call and see if anybody's phone number, contact information has changed. As it might be a year or two after you originally took the test. Sometimes it does take a while to go through the eligibility list. So once you confirm that if there's any changes to your contacts, by all means, just please bring it in with you and we can adjust accordingly. As far as background disqualifications, there's certain crimes where we are not able to hire you as a police officer. Any felony conviction is going to prevent your eligibility to be a police officer in certain misdemeanor offenses, mostly related to domestic battery. One of the requirements that we have is you have to have a valid firearms owner identification card, and there are certain crimes that prevent you from obtaining those. Other than that, there's not, people will frequently ask about specific incidents, and what we try to do is look at the totality of the person and the circumstances. So the best advice to you is to come in with an open mind and be honest. By far, one of the biggest hurdles that we have with background investigations is when someone is found to be untruthful or purposely omitted something. That is, like I said, by far the most disqualifying factor when it comes to candidates. If there is something that you're concerned about, we can talk about it right in the beginning of the process, and I can let you know if it's going to be a disqualifying factor. Otherwise, we can go through the process, get a full picture of you, and I can present that to our administration and the Police and Fire Commission. Beyond that, you're going to be placed through a polygraph examination, which is pretty straightforward. There's really no way to prepare for that. Just go in there confident and tell the truth. Same thing with the psychological examination. We'll have sometimes candidates that try to provide answers that they think we want to hear, and that's going to show, and it's going to raise some red flags. Go in there with honesty and hope for the best. Medical and examination and the drug screening, kind of a self-explanatory process again. One piece of advice I can give you is come to each portion of this process as though it's a formal job interview. Dress appropriately, arrive punctual, preferably early, and bring whatever materials are requested. The only one that might differ from that, I would follow the instructions for the medical examination and drug screening. Sometimes they request that you wear comfortable clothes that you can exercise in based on the test that they offer. One important thing to remember is if at any point we do advise you that you're not selected for whatever reason it may be, that doesn't mean that you cannot reapply again come our next testing cycle in 2023. We try and open this to as many candidates as possible, and there's nothing to preclude you to reapply and try to go through this process again, and maybe have some time and distance from whatever was concerning before, and we can reevaluate at that time. I'll hand this back over to Deputy Chief Zernicki.
Thank you, Detective Murphy. So now we'll kind of go into an overview of the police department, kind of a little bit about us and a little bit about Arlington Heights, how our organization works, organizational structure, and some of that information to give you a better idea of the organization as a whole. So Arlington Heights, we're a suburb of Chicago. We're about 25 miles northwest of the city. We're very easily accessible from the city. On our southern border, we have I-90. On our western border, we have Route 53, which is basically, 355 and 290. So it's very easy to get to Arlington Heights. We also have the Metro train rail that comes right through the middle of town. So if you need to get downtown, we have a train station right in the middle of town, very easily accessible. Our population is about 77,676, according to the most recent estimate. So since our last estimate in 2010, we've grown about 2,000, 3,000 residents from that time. A lot of our village is residential neighborhoods, a lot of single family homes. If you ever been to Arlington Heights, you'll also notice our downtown area. We have a lot of multi-unit apartment buildings, high rises in the downtown area. So a lot of our community is residential. And about 75% of that is owner occupied, meaning that they're residents of our town and they bought property here. Important to kind of note about that is that, that kind of speaks a little bit about our community. Arlington Heights is a desirable community. A lot of people want to come live in Arlington Heights, raise their families. It's a very friendly, active community where people want to stay, people want to live, people want to set up roots in Arlington Heights. Our median home value is about $350,000. So again, that kind of speaks to that it's a desirable community. People want to be here. We're also very large. It's about 17 square miles with about 230 miles of linear roadway. That's a lot of town. I believe with the latest census, we're the 15th largest city in Illinois. So we're a big village and a big organization, the police department. The village has 438 full-time employees, and of the 438, the PD is 139. So we're the largest department in the village with 139 employees, and 109 of them are sworn officers. This is our organizational chart, and we'll kind of go into a little more detail for each one of the divisions, but we're comprised of 3 divisions: the patrol division, the administrative services division, and the criminal investigations community services division. And we'll break that down one by one a little bit and kind of give you an idea of what each one of those divisions does for the police department. The administrative services division, that's headed up by the deputy chief. That would be me. I'm an administrative services division, and we're kind of a lot of the business related aspects of running a police department, whether it being policy, our records bureau, filling out requests for information from the public, filing police reports, all the background stuff that makes the organization move, making sure our officers have all the equipment that they need, planning, researching any new technology that we'd want to deploy in Arlington Heights. That's kind of some of the stuff the administrative services division does. And again, it's 2 bureaus. It's the records bureau. They handle all the police reports that come in, any information, arrest reports, filing all that, making sure all that information is kept safe, confidential, and that we have a strict record of everything that we do. Our support bureau is comprised of 1 sergeant, a detective, 2 administrative service officers, and an account clerk. So again, the sergeant that's in the support bureau is kind of in charge of, making sure that training is set up, that officers are scheduled for training, any required training, any ancillary training that they might need, making sure all that happens. Detective Murphy, he's assigned to administrative division as well. And he's kind of in charge of some of the background stuff and hiring, recruitment, and all those functions. The administrative service officers, they act as a court liaison. They'll go to court, make sure that the officers have all their case jackets, kind of act as a in between to make sure that all the cases are getting sent to court, prosecuted, recording any information that happens during those proceedings. So we have all our information up to date. Additionally, we also have an administrative service officer that's kind of in charge of the evidence function, property management. Any evidence that comes into the police department, he makes sure that it gets logged, stored, kept, all those functions regarding that. And there's a lot of evidence, and that's a lot to manage on a daily basis. And our account clerk, making sure the bills get paid. I make sure that the officers get their paychecks on time, and that anything that we buy, that our vendors are getting paid as well. Moving on to our criminal investigations and community services division, that also has a deputy chief and a commander. The criminal investigation bureau, that's your detectives. That's they're conducting the follow-up investigations on crimes, conducting interviews, all those functions of doing the investigations that exceed of what a patrol officer would be doing on the street. A lot of times they're in-depth investigations that take a long time. It's not something that, you come in and say, hey, listen, I'm going to clear out 5 cases today. Some of these cases last a long time, and it takes a lot of work to process those and get to that point where we could clear out cases. We have 4 adult detectives, 4 juvenile detectives. We also have 2 detectives that are part of task forces, and these are task forces that are multi-jurisdictional task forces. So the DEA, we have an officer assigned there to assist in some of their investigations. And then we have a North Central Narcotics Task Force. So like that name mentions, it's dealing with drug interdiction, making sure we get the drugs off the street. So we participate in these task forces because it's a benefit to not only Arlington Heights but also surrounding communities. We're contributing to a goal of reducing crime, and we value putting our personnel into those situations to assist in those endeavors. We also have officers that are assigned to the high schools to act as liaisons with the school administration and the police department. And then we also have 2 officers assigned to gang crimes. Community Services Bureau, that is more of the community involvement, community events, reaching out to the community, and kind of those projects that might involve, a little more in-depth, problem-oriented policing, coming up with solutions for, various community problems. So there's a sergeant, a crime prevention officer, 2 school resource officers, problem-oriented policing coordinator, and then we also have a victim services coordinator. And that employee works as a resource for us. So if we ever have, crimes that involve victims, she will act as a kind of a mediator to help them through the process. Whether that means going to the courthouse to obtain an order of protection and kind of walk them through everything, because being the victim of a crime is stressful enough. So we provide that service to be able to help them get through this and go through the entire process. The next division is the patrol division, and this is kind of the heart of the police department. These are the men and women that are on the street, are the initial contacts every day. It's staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have three bureaus, which correspond to each one of the 3 shifts. And that's the midnight shift, the day shift, and the afternoon shift. So each one of those shifts is headed by a commander, 3 sergeants, and depending on, every shift has a different workload. You'll have anywhere from 15 officers on the midnight shift to 23 officers on the afternoon shift. They also have, on midnights, they have a power shift. So this is an overlapping shift that kind of goes between the afternoon shift and the midnight shift, kind of during the times where there's increased activity, increased calls for service, where we need a little more staffing on the street. There's also public service officers. We have a front desk that's staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So anybody that comes into the police lobby is always greeted by somebody at the front desk, a representative of the police department, to answer any questions, whether they need to fill out a police report, get some information about whatever it might be. We always have somebody at the front desk, and those are staffed by civilian public service officers. We also have the traffic bureau. So we have a dedicated unit for traffic related activities, traffic enforcement, parking enforcement. And that has 1 commander, a sergeant, 3 traffic enforcement officers. Those traffic enforcement officers are out there every day, and their main focus and their main goal is traffic safety. So any traffic complaints that we might get from citizens, any problem areas that we've identified, due to increased traffic crashes, they'll go address those areas by, showing a high visibility presence, making sure that, people are following the traffic laws, writing tickets. That's a big part of it, and education as well. So they will put on presentations, they'll reach out to the communities, and our goal is not to have to write you a ticket. If you comply with the traffic laws, that's what we want. But if you do violate the laws, you could possibly get a ticket as well. Public Service Officer 2 positions, those are civilian positions that kind of will take, non-criminal police reports. They also serve as our animal wardens. So if we have any animal complaints, sick, injured animals, complaints about, domestic animals from neighbors, they'll handle those situations. And then parking enforcement with our downtown area, we have a big downtown area, a lot of parking, a lot of commuters using the metro train station. So they kind of manage that, make sure that people aren't, abusing the parking that's available to them, that parking is available to everybody equitably. A little bit about our calls for service. We typically handle about 21,000 calls for service per year. Of those calls, we have 580 Part 1 crimes. Now, some of you may or may not know what a Part 1 crime, but Part 1 crimes are the more serious offenses that get reported to the FBI for their crime index. So the crime index basically kind of gives the FBI a sense of, what the crime level is of that area. So these are the more serious offenses: homicides, aggravated batteries. It's not to say that we have 580 homicides a year. That's not the case. We have a very low crime rate in Arlington Heights, but that also includes our most serious Part 1 crimes would probably be larceny and theft. That could be retail theft. Somebody stole a bicycle, things like that. So those are Part 1 crimes. Part 2 crimes are the less serious crimes. We have about 1,000 of those, and that accounts for about 5% of our total calls for service. Traffic crashes, we're one of the lowest rates of traffic crashes around, and that has a lot to do with our traffic enforcement efforts, our outreach to the community. We reached, a 16-year low of declining traffic crashes. So that's a testament to our dedication to making sure that the neighborhoods are safe, and traffic safety has always been a priority for the department, whether it's a speeding ticket or it could be a DUI. And the other 87% of the calls for service are other calls for service, and this could be anything ranging from a public service, somebody locked out of their vehicle, a check for well-being, somebody's concerned about a family member that they haven't heard from for a while, hold-up alarms, burglar alarms that we'll go check on to make sure that there's no crime in progress going on. So those are some of the other calls for service that we might be dispatched to or initiate. A little bit about shift scheduling. So as an entry-level officer, you start off with, after your date of hire, you have an 18-month probationary period. So during that probationary period, you'd be scheduled to go to the academy, you'd do your field training, and then you'd be released for solo patrol. So as long as you complete the academy, go through your FTO program successfully, then we'll certify you to say that you're ready for solo patrol, which means that you could go out, you'll be assigned your own beat, and then you won't be under the direct supervision of a field training officer. And during that time, you're rotated through the 3 different shifts. So you could be on midnights, you could be on day shift, or you could be on afternoon shift, depending on where the need is at that time with the staffing. Non-probationary officers, so once you come off of probation after 18 months, you could bid for your shift. And the officers bid for their shift annually, and they're typically, most of the time, they're just assigned to that shift for the year. So you know what to expect for the year, which shift you're going to be working on, what hours you're going to be working on, and what days you're going to be working. So you could plan your year accordingly. If you have any vacations you might want to take, you'll know exactly when you're working, where you're working. So our officers work on a 6 days on, 3 days off schedule. So that 6 days on, 3 days off keeps rotating. So you could easily figure out, once you know what shift you're assigned to and what days you're working, your whole schedule for the entire year, and that stays consistent for the entire year. We work 8.5-hour days. I'll kind of go into some of the shift times and kind of explain a little bit that on, I think it's the next slide. So our midnight shifts, they work from 10:30 at night to 7 in the morning. So kind of explain, and this kind of works, this applies to each one of those shifts. So when you start your day at 10:30, you report to work, get geared up, get your uniform on, get all your gear ready for the day, and then you report to roll call at 10:30. During roll call, we'll go over any information that happened during the previous shift, so you kind of understand what's been going on, any calls for service of interest, any assignments that you might be getting. So that typically lasts about 15 minutes, and then at that point, the shift that's currently on the street gets called in, and then you take over watch, and then that lasts until 6:30 in the morning, when the next shift comes on, does their roll call, and the change of the guard happens at that time. Our day shift is from 6:30 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Evenings or afternoon shift, that's 2:30 to 11. And like I mentioned before, we also have that power shift that kind of overlaps two of the shifts that, when there's a increased calls for service and there's an increased need for staffing on the street, they work from 7 o'clock to 3:30 in the morning. This kind of depicts our beat structure. So Arlington Heights is divided into 8 different beats. That's not to say that that's minimum staffing is only 8. That's just our primary beat structure or our service areas. If you could see by the map, Arlington Heights we're large, but we're very long, meaning that it takes a while for you to get from all the way down south from beat 1116 by I-90 all the way up to Lake Cook Road. That's a good 25-minute drive in traffic. So we're very long, kind of narrow, but we're divided up into beats. And each officer is assigned a beat, and they're responsible for that beat during their shift. So if you get a calls for service in your beat, you'll be going to your calls for service, handling that, and you're kind of responsible for patrolling that area. Residential areas in the neighborhoods, doing traffic enforcement initiatives throughout your beat. So that's your area of assignment for the day. We also have cover cars for the different beats, which will kind of, if you look at the map, you'll see 1100, 1102, 1104. You'll have a cover car for those areas. So in case you do need a backup, you have a backup that could kind of fill in. Or if you're tied up on calls for service and another call comes out in your area, there's always going to be somebody to assist you, to back you up, and to help you out. Minimum staffing for each one of the shifts varies. Again, calls for service vary based on time of day. In the middle of the night at 3 a.m., everybody should be asleep, but obviously there's some people that are out on the street and might not be up to they might not be up to good. But midnights we have 1 sergeant assigned and 6 officers, and that's a minimum. It's not saying that it's only going to be 6. Sometimes we have 7, 8 officers working on that shift. Days, there's 1 sergeant, 9 officers. Evenings, 2 supervisors and 10 officers. Looking at that, you could probably tell which is the busiest shift, and that would be the afternoon shift. A lot of traffic during rush hour in the afternoon. A lot of people trying to get home. They just finished their day. They just want to get home. A lot of traffic. People are getting home. Domestics. That all kind of spikes during that afternoon shift hours. So they are a very busy shift. I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Flenchy, who will kind of talk about a little bit about training and some ancillary assignments that you could expect, at Arlington Heights.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Zernicki. As Chief Pecora mentioned earlier, Arlington Heights really is a destination agency. I'm in charge of all of our training. I'm just going to do a brief overview. One of the reasons that I came to Arlington Heights is because I had heard that there's a lot of training, a lot of opportunity here. So I came from another agency as well. For basic recruit training, we use the Suburban Law Enforcement Academy. It's called SALIA at the College of DuPage. SALIA is 14 weeks long. It's approximately 560 hours. It is not a residential academy, meaning you drive to and from each day. You have the weekends off. Once you finish up basic recruit training academy, you're going to come back to the Arlington Heights Police Department and do our Arlington Heights Police Department orientation training. That's usually about 5 days of training prior to starting field training. Field training is approximately 15 weeks, and you rotate between the shifts and between different FTOs. After field training is complete, the final stage is 10 days of observation. And then during the completion of your 18-month probationary period, you're going to check in with supervisors about once a month, just to make sure you're doing a good job and you've gotten the training that you need and you're progressing well. In-service training is our yearly training. We go over things such as our handgun qualification, rifle qualification, less lethal, shotgun qualification, taser qualification, use of force, including scenario-based training and force-on-force scenarios. Some of the specialty training that we offer here, we actually purchased what's called a virtual machine, a virtual reality machine. Gives 300 degrees of immersion in scenarios over 5 different screens. And we can use that for qualifications, firearms proficiency, de-escalation. We can run scenario-based training. Weapon systems that we have available for that system is our pistol, rifle, less lethal shotgun, taser. We can also use flashlights and weapon-mounted lights. You can go ahead and click to the next screen. Specialty assignments within the Arlington Heights Police Department include criminal investigator, gang crimes investigator, juvenile investigator, DEA narcotics, task force investigator, North Central narcotics investigator. All of these investigations assignments all come with their own training that we send you to. Traffic enforcement officer, crime prevention officer, school resource officer, problem-oriented policing officer. And again, we have specialty classes that we send everyone to for that as well. Ancillary assignments. So this is something you would be assigned while still being assigned to the patrol bureau. So this is in addition to being a patrol officer and being assigned to a beat and handling 911 calls and calls for service and crashes. You can also be a canine handler. We're part of the NIFAS Emergency Services team. That is our multi-regional emergency services team. It's comprised of over 80 member agencies. Alias Mobile Field Force is the state police mobile field force to respond to riots and civil disturbances. Patrol rifle officer, you get extra training with our M4 rifles that are in all the squad cars. Field training officer, forensic technician. Some of our forensic technicians go to additional training to become arson investigators, accident investigator, accident reconstructionist. That's something that we're very big on here in Arlington Heights, and we utilize the Northwestern University for a lot of our crash reconstructionist training. Bicycle officer, motorcycle officer. Again, we go through the Northwestern curriculum for a 2-week motorcycle operator school. We have an honor guard and then a major case assistance team, MCAT. That's generally for criminal investigations, but we also have different units assigned within MCAT, such as surveillance, investigations, and then their STAR team, which is their crash reconstruction team. With that, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant Flenchy. So you could kind of get a sense of the department. There's a lot of opportunities within our organization to do a lot of different things. We, like Sergeant Flenchy said, we value training a lot to make sure that we could offer services to the village at a very high level. And that means, training our officers, having all these different ancillary assignments, because that does, in the end, it does benefit not only you professionally, but also the community and the organization. So we'll move on to some employment benefits. So aside from the personal satisfaction of being in a profession that has a lot of honor, dignity, and is a very rewarding profession, you also get some employment benefits. So that's those are the your salary and your other benefits, and we'll kind of go into detail about those. So effective on January 1st of next year, our salary range for police officers is 71,000 to 111,000. That is a very generous salary. We're very competitive with a lot of our comparable agencies around us. The one thing that stands out from Arlington Heights and some other agencies is how fast you reach that top salary of 111,000. That happens fairly quickly. So after hire, in about 4.5 years, you're topped out at your top salary. So it's a very quick turnaround. So even though you start at 71, 4 years later, you're going to be topped out at the top pay. Vacation days, kind of along the same lines. You start off with 10 days per year of vacation time, and that increases with more years of service. So after about 4 years, you get 5 extra days, so you get 15 days, and that tops out at 25 days after 24 years of service, with a couple extra steps in between those that I just mentioned. Those are just examples. Sick leave, you get 1 sick day per month that you could accrue up to 240 days. And a lot of times our officers accrue those days. So in case, there's unforeseen emergency later on in life, or you got to take some time off, you have time built up that you could use, in case of an emergency. You never know. I might be, cleaning out my gutters in the fall, and I, slip and fall off the ladder, and I might need to take some time off. That's what the sick days are for, and you could accumulate 240 days of that time. Upon your retirement from the police department, that sick time also is beneficial, because that could be used to buy continuing health insurance. So for I believe it's every 5 days of unused sick time, you get a month of continuing health insurance coverage with the village. So that kind of bridges the gap until you either buy insurance yourself in retirement, or you get insurance elsewhere. Holiday leave, every officer gets 12 days off per year. Now, considering that we're a 24/7 operation, 365, you might be working Christmas and Thanksgiving. So you could use that holiday time, if you're in the patrol bureau, to take off at another time during the year. So it's not necessarily just for Christmas or for the holidays. You could use that time at any point throughout the year. Longevity, you also get a check once a year, depending on how many years of service you have. So if you've been here, between 5 to 9 years, later on in November of every year, you get a longevity check of $900. And that increases as you have more years of service on. So that'll go up to $1,600 after 20 years of service. You're also part of the police pension fund. So I believe that any new hire that we get now would be part of tier 2. So you'd be eligible for retirement at age 55. Medical, dental, Blue Cross Blue Shield. We have PPO, HMO plans, a fantastic health insurance program here. Dental coverage, we have supplemental insurance for vision care. It's a very comprehensive program. It's very, any type of medical service you need is pretty much covered under this program. Life insurance, also the village offers at no cost to the employees, life insurance of $50,000, and that insurance is effective 31 days after employment. Some additional benefits that are kind of specific to the police department. Upon hire, your initial uniform is provided. So that's your initial uniform, your vest, your ballistic vest, jackets, your duty belt, boots. All of that is provided upon hire, and that's paid for by the department, aside from your duty firearm. So that's something that is on the employee to buy themselves, within our guidelines of what type of weapons we allow or authorized for use. But aside from that, your uniforms are provided. Then on top of that, every year, the officers are granted a $600 uniform allowance. So you get a check for $600 that will cover, uniform replacements. If you need a new shirt, a new vest carrier, new boots, all those things that kind of, just wear and tear just through daily use. So we provide you with money to be able to replace all that. An equipment allowance, $300 annually, and that could cover some of the equipment that you might need. You might need a new flashlight, extra flashlight batteries, anything that it kind of falls outside of the scope of just uniforms. We also give you money for that to be able to replenish that and make sure that you're well equipped for work every day. Tuition reimbursement program is sponsored by the village. So if you want to go back to school and continue your education, get a higher degree, the village will reimburse you, and it's a certain percentage based on what degree you're trying to go for, and it's also dependent upon the grades you get. They don't want to see anybody going to school and paying for classes that you're failing out of, but they want to see all of our employees be able to have that opportunity to continue to get a higher degree, because if they have aspirations to move through their organization or climb the ladder, go from an officer to a sergeant, education is always important. We also have 6 premium pay holidays. So like I mentioned, in patrol, you might have to work Christmas or Thanksgiving or 4th of July. To kind of offset that, the police contract has premium pay holidays, which is basically double time pay. So if you're working on one of those 6 holidays that we've designated, 4th of July being one of them, Christmas, Thanksgiving, those holidays, you'll get double time pay. So if you're scheduled to work that day, you'll be compensated a little bit more because it's a holiday. Court overtime pay, that is a minimum 3 hours of pay if you're scheduled to go to court on that day. Our courthouse is right next door to us, right on our border in Rolling Meadows. So you'll be required to go to court from time to time, but that's also compensated. So even if you go to court and it's, you're only there for an hour, we understand that, there's travel time involved and you have to, it's not during your normal duty day. You might have just been working a midnight shift. So it's a minimum 3 hours of pay when you have to go to court outside your normal duty hours. And I believe that is about all we have. I listed my contact information on there. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to give me a call. You can send me an email. I'd be more than happy to answer any of those questions. Again, if you have any questions specific about the written exam, contact IO Solutions. Any questions you have regarding that, please contact them. But otherwise, feel free to reach out at any time. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tyler and we'll start the Q&A session. I know there's a couple questions that are sitting in the queue, and we'll get to those now.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Chief, and all our speakers for their review of our department and the entire process. I will start going through these questions and see how we can answer them. So it looks like we have a couple questions regarding how many officers our department is looking to hire. I believe Deputy Chief Zernecki, you might be the best one to answer that.
Absolutely. That's kind of a hard question to answer because our vacancies kind of fluctuate throughout the year. Currently, right now, we have about, I want to say 4 or 5 vacancies, but those are being filled constantly, whether it's with our current eligibility list, entry-level eligibility list, or certified applicants. So that's constantly being filled, and then new vacancies happen. So when somebody retires, that creates a new vacancy. So it's constantly rotating, constantly changing. So we're filling vacancies as they occur or when we're anticipating them. So it's a difficult question to answer because, once you get through the written process and the interviews, that number of vacancies is going to change. It could be higher, it could be lower. It's hard to tell, but we're always always filling vacancies. I could guarantee you that there's always a few hires every year.
Okay, and then we have another question regarding if vacation days roll over. Yep.
Yeah, I'll answer that one as well. So the officers are allowed to carry over vacation time. You could have a balance of 30 days of either vacation time or holiday time that kind of rolls over from year to year. So if you want to keep this is outside of, sick time, but if you want to keep 30 days in your bank at all times, that could roll over from year to year. So if you don't have, 1 year you don't have any vacations planned, but a couple of years down the road you want to take 2 or 3 vacations and you're able to take the time off, then you could have a bank of 30 days at any given point.
I could just add to that. In addition to the 30 days, we also offer the employees the opportunity to accrue compensatory time. That's working time and a half and taking time rather than money. And our contract, the collective bargaining agreement, allows the officers to keep a balance of up to 102 hours. So that's in addition to your 30 days.
Okay, moving on to the next question. One participant asked, what is considered passing for the written exam? If anyone,
It's 70%.
70%, all right, great.
Right.
We also have quite a few questions regarding transcripts. Specifically, some participants mentioned they might have an issue with their college. Some might not be sealed. I guess a way to address this would be, do all transcripts have to be in prior to the application deadline or written exam, or could that be addressed later on in the process?
That's a good follow-up question for IO Solutions. There may be some latitude because of staffing issues. So give IO Solutions a call and see what their exceptions are.
Great. Move on to the next question. Does the department go through all lateral officer applicants before hiring from the eligibility list? I'll open that up to everyone on the panel.
So we have 2 concurrent lists that happen. So you have the entry level and you have the certifieds, and that's kind of up to depending when we have the vacancies, and up to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners which list they're going to be filling the vacancies from. So it's both, and it's we have new hires and we have laterals. It's just dependent on when the vacancies happen and where we're at in the process with certain things.
Next question would be, what is the earliest anticipated start date for anyone making this eligibility list? Based on how long the testing process and hiring process goes on.
Well, that's going to be that's dependent too. For the entry level, a lot has to do the start date with when we have the ability to get somebody into the academy. So as Sergeant Flenchie mentioned, we use the Suburban Law Enforcement Academy, and they run their academies 3-4 times a year, and a lot of departments use those academies. So we're vying for spots for each one of those academies. So if we have a spot open, we have a vacancy, and we have a spot in one of the academies, that's when that would happen. So there's no given start date after there's an eligibility list established. It's dependent upon the vacancies, and then for entry level, when we could get somebody into the academy.
And the next question would be, after probation, the probationary period, is an officer assigned to the same beat for the entire year? We'll have Officer Ovington. Would you care to answer that one?
So for beats, we don't really have assigned permanent beats. You will be assigned on a day-to-day basis. We do take into consideration some officers like the north side of town, some officers like the south side of town. It's kind of based on seniority as well. Sometimes you end up in a busier beat or the station beat just to get more experience. So it really just depends on a day-to-day basis where you're assigned.
Great, thank you. Looks like I'll conclude with a couple more here. One person has asked how the scoring process is during the oral part of the hiring process. The oral interview aspect. I believe Deputy Chief Zernecki, you might be the best person qualified to answer that.
Yeah, so your interview with the Fire and Police Commission, so that's basically once you pass the written exam, you're kind of listed based on your score for the written exam. The Fire and Police Commission then does the interviews, and they kind of rate each one of the candidates based on various different criteria. And then from there, they'll adjust the list accordingly based on how you performed on the interview process.
Great. Next, we'll kind of end here with this question. Has the Bears possibly moving to Arlington Heights had any effect on the police department? I'll open that up to anyone on the panel.
I'll take a stab at that. I'm sure there's some excitement. We've had a lot of telephone calls recently, but understanding it's just a purchase agreement, and they've got a year plus to do their due diligence and make a determination if they're going to purchase the property. So let's not put the cart before the horse before they put a shovel in the ground. So we're anxious, but we're on a wait and see posture.
Great. So for the rest of the questions here regarding the test, once again, recommend reaching out to IO Solutions regarding confirmation or receiving emails as they'll be administering that part of the exam. That concludes our orientation. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Looks like we had quite a few participants, which we're glad to see. And we wish everyone luck moving forward in the entry-level exam process. Thank you again for attending.
I'm sorry. Like there's several questions in the actual chat. Do you want to just look at that really quick?
Oh,
Not in the Q&A, but the actual chat.
Okay. Let's see. Does I guess one person asked if we currently have any spots at the academy.
So the academy spots, we're constantly anticipating, again, trying to play that game of, are we going to have vacancies? So what we basically do is we always reach out to the academy and say, we might be anticipating, one slot, and we'll always kind of, reserve a slot just in case if we have a vacancy come up, so we kind of get waitlisted. So we're constantly always trying to keep those spots open for Arlington. So when that does occur, it's months out when we're reserving this. So we kind of try to plan accordingly. But it's, I don't have a crystal ball all the time to say, we're definitely sending one 9 months out. It's hard to tell.
Okay. I believe that is it. A lot of the chat is saying thank you and appreciate it, guys. Thank you for attending this. Glad this provides some knowledge of our department and community in the process. And once again, good luck going forward during the hiring process. That will conclude our orientation.